everyone. Thank you for coming to our event today. I'm honored to welcome you all to the Sine Institute Fellows event here at American University. My name is Alyssa Guevara, and I'm honored to open today's conversation as part of the Sine Institute's 250 Plus event at American University. And thank you very much to our co-sponsors, the Immigration Lab and the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies. The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is dedicated to bringing diverse perspectives into the thoughtful dialogue on the most pressing challenges facing our democracy. Its mission is rooted in the belief that an engaged academic community can help shape solutions by bridging sector divides, bringing together scholars, practitioners, and students to convene, communicate, and collaborate around issues that matter the most. Today, we are especially privileged to host María Teresa Kumar, Emmy-nominated political and voting rights activist and co-founder and CEO of Voto Latino, an organization that has registered millions of voters and significantly strengthened civic engagement across the country. Through her work, María Teresa Kumar has empowered communities and elevated the voices of underrepresented Americans in our democracy. In conversation with her today is Congressman Joaquin Castro. Now in his 7th term in the U.S. House of Representatives, the congressman serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He was the 2013 co-president for the House Freshman Democrats and the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus for the 116th Congress. Having experienced America's promise firsthand, Congressman Castro wants to help build what he calls the infrastructure opportunity, so that future generations will have the same chance to pursue their American dream. As a congressman, he continues to be a tireless advocate for those who call San Antonio home. From supporting military families to investing in education, Congressman Castro remains committed to helping mold an infrastructure of opportunity for San Antonio and Americans around the country. He is also our second favorite Castro. His twin brother, Secretary Julian Castro, was also a Sine Fellow. Just kidding, of course. In Maria's seminar, Latino Power 250 Plus, History, Voice, and the Future of Latino Democracy, she invites us to consider how Latino leadership, identity, and collective power shape the ongoing evolution of civic life in this nation. I'm very excited for the insights we will gain and the conversations we will have today. Thank you for being here and for engaging with us as part of this critical dialogue. Please join me in welcoming María Teresa Kumar and Congressman Joaquin Castro.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Incredibly graceful. You know, Joaquin, I would just take umbrage with this idea that you're the second favorite right now. So I think they've set the bar.
I have a twin brother, Julian, who was mayor of San Antonio and then was in President Obama's cabinet. And a few years ago, he was a Sine Fellow here at American. And so, but yeah, there's a really easy way to tell Julian and I apart. If you see my brother, you'll notice that he's a lot uglier than I am. We're twins.
As a good younger brother is basically saying that to your brother. So I have been fortunate enough to work with both Julian and Joaquin for some time. And what is fun about this conversation is really the opportunity to talk about current events and the opportunity that we see before us in this specific moment, specifically around a diverse America that happens to be disproportionately you all. Generation Z and Generation Alpha are technically the largest cohorts of potential voters in this country. And so however you decide, when you decide to participate, it will change the course of the country. And so one of the things last night that was, to me, of particular interest, Julian, was for the State of the Union. We were watching it last night. I think there was a lot of, you could unpack what was true, what wasn't, and kind of scratch your head and try to figure out guidelines and roadmaps. And one of the things that struck me was that you had a president going in last year with his highest approval ratings that we'd ever seen for him, based on two things: that he was going to fix the economy and he was going to address the immigration issue by incarcerating the most dangerous. Fast forward almost 12 months to the day, we saw him going into that exact same chamber with his worst approval ratings, not of just himself, but of any president, because he has not been able to accomplish neither immigration nor affordability. And so usually when you have a lame duck president, he at the same time that you're about to have a major midterm election, you see the State of the Union as an opportunity for them to talk about the policies that they're going to do to address and regain their popularity. That is what is expected. Instead, what we saw is some policy that I think is going to actually be really interesting, because is he really going to stop insider trading in Congress? That's interesting. But should be held accountable for the executive branch and cabinet secretaries? I'm in all for that. He talked about 401ks and the market as it relates to voters, right? He didn't say the market was working for everyone. He was very specific with the 401k. Interesting. But instead of providing real policies, he talked about one piece of legislation that really sparked our interest at Voto Latino, and that was the SAVE Act. And the SAVE Act basically, and it's going to be the premise of our conversation today. How many folks here are familiar with the SAVE Act? Okay, by the end of this conversation, not only do I need all of your hands raised, but I need you guys to be evangelists of why it's such a bad idea, okay? So the SAVE Act is under the premise that there's massive voter fraud at the polls. At a very bare minimum, that means that in order for us to safeguard our elections, even though there has been no proven fraud at all, and I say this because President Trump has been elected not once, but twice by all 50 states who have certified fair and free elections. The SAVE Act now is going to require everyone to have a national voter ID at minimum. Now that sounds innocuous, except for you have to be able to demonstrate either you have a birth certificate or two versions of an ID or a passport. Less than 50% of Americans have a passport. So that right there is going to be a time tax to find the right identification, and a poll tax, because it's going to cost you anywhere from $60 to $195. And if you're married, a married woman, you're more likely to be disenfranchised because you have to be able to demonstrate your birth certificate and produce other documents. And so when someone is losing, most people would use the State of the Union to address the American public and really try to meet their concerns. Instead, what we saw last night was a constituency that is trying to change the rules of participation for the midterm elections. And so that's where I really want to have this conversation, because I think that we started talking about the disenfranchisement of rules of regulation around voting, specifically back in 2013 with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. It was Shelby County against Eric Holder. And the most underreported story, there's many, but the most underreported story of Shelby County, Congressman, was that Shelby County in the 2010 census had experienced a 200% increase in the Latino population and a 93% increase in the African American population. So the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, again, Shelby County, really tiny county, seemed innocuous, except when you actually started digging why were they all of a sudden interested in gutting access to the voting booth. And then you actually follow the history, and the 22 jurisdictions, that followed, that gutted the that followed the guidance produced by the Supreme Court in Shelby County, the 22 counties had experienced a minimum of a 90% increase in the Latino population. Now, between 2000 and 2010, according to the census, Latinos became the second largest population in this country, not because of immigration, but because of children of immigrants. So 2013, Shelby County, one could argue, was a direct result of recognizing that while the Latino community in that moment was not of age to vote, they were safeguarding and restricting access to the voting booth to a multicultural America. Because we could actually borrow this lens and actually say that it also applied to the Asian community, mostly young. And so right now there seems to be really, Congressman, a battle of a multicultural America with an access to the voting booth and a really strong effort to prevent that from happening. Let's take your state of Texas, right? We love Texas at Voto Latino. We think that there's incredible opportunity there, and it's not because you're sitting here. It's, Voto Latino, we have proudly registered close to 350,000 Texans, disproportionately young people. And in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, young Texans, disproportionately multicultural, increased their voting by 23%. It was huge. Texas went from dead last in voter participation to I think it went up to like 8 points, according to states, when you marked the states. And what was interesting is that fast forward January of 21, instead of applauding the increased participation across all Texans, and particularly young people, the state legislature did something really interesting. They basically passed 2 pieces of legislation, SB 1 and SB 1111. Does anybody know what that is? So SB 1 and SB 1111 basically restricted that you only could register to vote if you were at a permanent address. How many people here live in dorms? Raise your hands higher. How many people register to vote here at AU? Using your parents' address, using your local address, your dorm address, or your temporary housing. So most college campuses, you end up registering to vote, like I did. I don't know where I registered on my college campus, UC Davis. I was about 2.5 hours away from my house, and I was able to vote on campus. According to Texas law, you were not going to be able to vote at a temporary address. So that means that if you had traveled from out of town or out of the state, you'd have to physically go back to the state or back to the city that you came from to be able to vote. And so Voto Latino sued. And I want to ask you, Congressman, for our time, is what are the implications writ large when we start disenfranchising certain populations?
Well, I mean, I guess let's step back and understand what in a society how you express different viewpoints and perspectives. And we have a country of 330 million people, a very diverse country, diverse politically and in every other way. And how do you peacefully resolve your differences? The way that you do that is by voting. Yeah. There is a competition to see which version is going to prevail. In the American system, that's mostly a two-party system of Republican and Democrat. So when a legislature or the federal government starts throwing in obstacles to expressing that opinion and that perspective, then they're essentially trying to disenfranchise a group of people, whether it's a racial minority, racial ethnic minority, or a group of folks who believe certain things. So in Texas, I kind of feel like with the SAVE Act, we went through a lot of this for years in Texas. Right. The big bill that people mostly have heard of is voter ID, where you've got to show up and provide ID in order to vote. And that's been the law of the land now in Texas for several years. But I remember in 2011 when I was still in the Texas legislature, there were a slew of other behind-the-scenes bills, like the one you mentioned, that also were intended to make it harder for people to vote. For example, it used to be in Texas, there's 254 counties in Texas. So if you were somebody who was really active and wanted to register people to vote, it used to be that if you were deputized to do that in Texas, in one county, let's just say Travis County in Austin, then as long as you were deputized in one county, you could go around the state and register people in Bexar County and Harris County and Dallas, et cetera. Well, the legislature changed the law so that now you had to become deputized in each of the counties where you wanted to help register people to vote. So it was kind of these smaller bite-sized pieces of legislation that were also meant, along with voter ID and things like now being proposed the SAVE Act, that were intended to, as a kind of The way I see it, it's kind of a point shaving exercise.
Yep.
Because you're trying to shave off. Look, if you require people to come up with a driver's license, I don't know, let's just say 95% of people are going to end up having it, right? But there's going to be a certain percentage of people who aren't. And if you get into close races politically, electorally, that 5% can make a real difference in different races. One of the counter arguments you hear is, well, what's so hard about, showing your ID, right? Like, you got to show your ID to buy cigarettes or buy alcohol
Not
or
that
any
any
of
of
these
you
things.
do that, I understand.
Not yet. Well, remember, you're talking about a fundamental right in our democracy, which is the right to vote. Buying cigarettes is not a fundamental right in our democracy. So the reason you give the benefit of the doubt to the person is because you're talking about a right that's so fundamental as an American. The other thing is, the big problem we have in our country is not that too many people want to vote. It's that not enough people want to go out and vote, right? It's the problem we have is not, like, there's so many people hoarding the polls, including people who are not eligible to vote, and that's the big problem. No, the big problem is the reverse, is actually getting voter participation, getting people to actually go out and care enough to show up and vote. And so that's why, I've always found it ironic that whether it was voter ID or the SAVE Act or whatever it is, beside the malintent, is it's kind of ironic that it's attacking a problem that's not really there, right? You don't have this rush of people who are just waiting to go to the polls to commit voter fraud, right? That's just kind of literally like a fantasy that's been created over the years.
Well, and there's multiple studies, whether we're talking about Pew or the Brennan Center, like they've been able to demonstrate that there hasn't been voter fraud. Again, had there been, then we wouldn't have certified all 50 states fair, free elections from the inception. And I do think that something that you're saying is really interesting, because there is an organization that's called Universal Voting. It's part of Harvard and it's part of the Brookings Institute. And one of the things that they did was basically go around the world to find out what are the most thriving democracies that participate, where extremism is really tamped down. And it turned out to be the top of the line was Finland, and the other one was New Zealand. And one can argue, well, Finland because it is, it's more homogeneous. And then I point to Turkey, which it is as well, and they have problems. And then New Zealand, which is more diverse. And their commonality was that they had mandatory voting. And as a result, the person that says, oh, politics is not for me, all of a sudden had to vote. And so people actually so party leaders had to actually go track to the middle to get maximum participation. And so I think what you're saying is that if it was really a problem, maybe we would have solved for not just no voter fraud, but actual functioning policy.
Yeah.
And when we talk about Texas, why do you think Texas is uniquely positioned to have been kind of like the experimental lab for a lot of these voting suppression laws that we're now seeing at the national level?
Well, I'm going to opine here as a Democrat for a second, but it was Texas starting in the mid-90s, and then after that in the 2000s, really for a generation now, statewide, it has leaned conservative. It's been a solidly Republican statewide, bastion for conservatives. And there's been an attempt by Republicans in the legislature to hold on to that power. They don't want to give up that power. Even as the state has diversified, it's a majority-minority state. And so again, they did voter ID, they did other bills that were aimed at putting obstacles in the way of people voting. And I believe that in 2026, that's going to change finally in November. I think Democrats will have a strong November. But again, it's the only state where you have similar demographics that has the representation that it does across the state. You take Latinos, for example. The Latino community is not especially well represented in terms of the ranks of the statewide office holders of the state. Latinos make up a plurality. Nobody makes up a majority, but Latinos make up a plurality of the state at about 40%, and yet have very few statewide office holders. You have Ted Cruz, for example, U.S. Senator. You did have George P. Bush, who was land commissioner, but very few in a state where you have such a high population of Latinos.
Yeah. I mean, to put it in perspective, I think it's 76% of the classrooms are people of color.
Yeah,
Right.
in terms of age, the lower you go in terms of age, so school-age kids, elementary school kids, right? Like as you get to the lowest levels or the youngest people, those populations are even more diverse.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're seeing is that you have a legislature that does not reflect the population, not only in diversity, but also in age. And I think that.
Yeah, in fact,
right,
I
yeah.
saw there's a guy that does an analysis who's actually a Republican, I think, consultant.
That's okay.
Yeah. But he does like this Texas analysis, and we just had our first week of early voting that ended a few days ago. Early voting is going until this Friday. But he showed that 85% of the people that voted in the Republican primary to that point, the first week, that 85% of them were over the age of 50, right? With a significant chunk being over the age of 70. Right? So it's very skewed. You know, I was speaking about race and ethnicity for a second, but it's also very skewed in terms of age in the primaries. Now, the Democratic primary is a little bit better, but it's not like it's really representative in terms of age of the whole spectrum of folks, right? But it is better than that.
Right. Well, and what was fascinating in Texas in 2020, and we saw less people participate in 2022 and 2024, not just in Texas, but across the board. But it was the very first time that young people got in the game. And so what opportunities do you see right now for mobilization in Texas that gets roughly, I want to say there's roughly about 3.5 to 4 million Latinos under the age of 40 that are not registered or voting?
Yeah, I think there's an incredible opportunity. I mean, what I sense in talking especially, like I'm 51, right? But in talking to people that are 21, for example, people feel very disillusioned, right? And there's always, I think, especially as a young person, there's always a skepticism of government. I think sometimes even more than somebody that is, say, 71. Mm-hmm. But especially now, because people feel like opportunity has slipped away from them. Mm-hmm. You talk about now like a whole generation of people who really see owning a home, for example, as outside of what they may be able to do, right? And that's obviously very disillusioning and frustrating for folks. But then also right now, there's a lot of disillusion with the government. You take the Epstein files, for example, right? And the attempt for a long time to not release them. Yep. And then everything that's gone on with ICE and the brutality of the government, both on the streets in Minneapolis, for example, and then what I've seen in going to Dilley, this Dilley trailer prison and these other detention centers, there's a certain brutality behind closed doors.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that, yes, this president was very open about mass deportation, right? And he is, quote unquote, fulfilling that promise, but he's including everyone, right? Not just what he claimed to be the most criminal, but we're finding incidences of people that are in the middle of asylum or about to go get their citizenship, get dragged out, and all of a sudden, you know, put into these places. And one of the things that I think we learned last time when it came to waking people up of participation was tragically family separation.
Yeah.
And you've been spending a lot of time in Dilley, Texas, which is home to one of the largest detention centers for children specifically. And you have met with families, you've helped release children to their families. How does that impact a place like Texas that is not seeing the same volume of federal agents roaming their streets like we are witnessing in
Part of the reason for that is that the state
Minnesota.
government has set it up so that
Yep.
the law enforcement just feeds people to ICE rather than if you go to California or Minneapolis where they aren't cooperating in the same way, right? I think that first we ought to consider that we're living in the most transparent time that we've ever lived in. You know, so 20 years ago, for example, you wouldn't have had all the videos of what happened on the street in Minneapolis, right? Because technology has essentially done two things. It's turned all of us into instant social documentarians within a few seconds of taking out your phone and recording. And then social media has made it so that everybody can instantly publish and distribute widely, if your videos go viral, what they've seen. So you can document it and then you can share it in a very powerful way. And I think so. I think what we're seeing, and partly why people are being moved, is that they're actually seeing what's happening in a way that a generation ago you just didn't see. You know, I use the case, for example, of Rodney King in 1991 in Los Angeles, of where those of you that lived during that period or have read on it, where a man recorded Rodney King getting beaten by Los Angeles police officers in 1991. Somebody was just recording on a home video recorder.
Rodney King was a black man that in the middle of basically at night, they had been rumors of police brutality in LA with racial profiling among black and Latinos, but had never been documented in this way.
So to me, that was like a very first early instance of, now nobody shared it on social media back then. It was all on legacy,
there was no
traditional
social media back there.
television. But still, the idea that you would capture a moment and that moment would essentially go viral, and that it would help to change public opinion and ultimately public policy. We're in that era every single day now, right? You take the case of Liam Ramos, who we helped get released, and then I took him back to Minneapolis. So Liam Ramos was a young boy who was picked up along with his father in Minneapolis, and he had a Spider-Man backpack on and a cute blue hat on, and he and his father ended up in Dilley for some weeks, and we were able to help get them out, and then took them back to Minneapolis. But that case, I think, because there's hundreds of kids in this prison right now. Why does that case stand out? The case stood out because of that photograph and the images and the video as well, and so that's what made it especially powerful. Without those images, I don't know that his story or his case gets even half the attention that it would. And I've met many other kids who are just like him. In fact, when I was there on Friday, there was a young boy that was 7 named Liam Diaz. He was Liam Ramos. This boy was Liam Diaz from Honduras originally. And, and his story, their story is also very powerful, but nobody knows it, right? And so, what I'm saying is that this era that we're in, I think that's part of why it's moved people so much.
So one of the things that we know right now, going into the midterms, and I want to open it up for Q&As, but one of the things that we know right now is that independents usually help determine where this country goes, their participation. Latinos do as well, African Americans do as well, and young voters. And one thing that we know is that as of before the speech yesterday, going into the speech yesterday, Trump's approval ratings among independents was at 26%.
Yeah.
An all-time low. He's lost 19 percentage points among Latinos and 22 points among young people. With that and the back shadow of the SAVE Act, what do students need to do right now to prepare for the elections?
Well, first, I hope everybody will vote, will show up and vote. And also, I've always thought during my time in politics, I spent 10 years in the legislature, I'm in my 14th year in Congress, that young people actually can very much help drive their family members and their friends to go vote. And I think with families actually set the tone oftentimes for what direction the family is going to go in terms of supporting candidates. And I don't know if y'all appreciate that as much, is that your parents and your grandparents, and that they really value what you have to say and your feeling. There is kind of an appreciation of the opinion of youth, I think, that I don't know, is not always remarked upon. But so I would say have those conversations with your family members and your friends, and be part of this movement to get people to go out and vote. These elections, I can't imagine that we as a country, we continue to head down this dangerous road for another several years that we're on, where people's constitutional rights are being violated. I think human rights are being violated in many ways.
Well, and I think that it's really important that maximum participation at the polls speaks volumes. One of the things that we saw in the 2024 election was that close to a third of Latinos who had voted in 2020 did not vote in 2024. A third. So that's not the headline that we ever see. And the majority of them were under the age of 33. And so I do think that when you're encouraging people to register and to vote and to have conversations with your families, I often point to, this is before many of your times, but Voto Latino, we basically identify what are the best practices that marketing firms are doing to sell products to Latinos in particular. And that's because our families work really, really hard. And if you can get my mom to actually give you $1, she must really value whatever you're selling. And so sometime around 2014, we started seeing ads in Subaru where it was a young Latina in the back, a little girl, while her mom was driving. We started seeing Verizon commercials where little kids were also choosing the phones. And it was because what marketers realized is that those young Latinos were translating, see my mommy, those young Latinos were translating America for their families and influencing consumer choices. And that was one of the things that for us, when we were figuring out our strategy, we started focusing specifically, disproportionately on young Latinas that were around 19 years old. Because we recognized if we can get her to vote, she was going to be the person that was actually going to get her family. And it was based on, again, market research and personal experience. And so as we go into this, I think it's really important to say what Congressman Castro is saying is like, not only do we need you in the game, but we need your family in the game. And they often look at first generation in particular on how to guide them in navigating democracy and flex your purchasing power. And with that, I would love to welcome questions. And how are we doing on time? Yes. Yes.
We have.
Right. But there's a mic.
Here you go. Oh, okay. I guess
Your name, please.
Sophia Pichardo. I'm from Miami, Florida, and I had my grandmother and my grandfather just recently become citizens. I'm a first generation here in the United States after my parents immigrated from Venezuela. And I guess my question right now would be, how could I convince my family to vote? Because I do think it's an important thing. My friend here has drilled that into me the past year and a half. God bless you. But I don't think I've been able to reach my parents or my grandparents in the same way that my friends have been able to reach me. And I do think it's important for people to vote because I think our voices are important in that sense.
100%. Do you want to take it first?
Sure. I mean, I think that you center it like around what you think they care about most. Whether, for example, grocery prices in Texas, we have a big grocery chain, H-E-B. So you go into H-E-B, and a few times now that I've gone in there, people will tell me about how the prices on different things keep going up, right? So whether it's groceries or the cost of things, or the fact that I think the Latino community has been made a target by Donald Trump and this administration. I'll give you a direct example. When I was at Dilley on Friday, I talked to a lot of people, but two of the cases that stick out in my mind, there was a young man that was about 15 who was from Miami and was in Dilley in that prison and said that he went to SLAM Academy, I guess. That was his high school in Miami. And then another younger boy that was 12 who was crying because they have not offered those kids any school at all. They opened Dilley in April of 2025 and have provided no schooling. They're supposed to start March 7th. And he went to, I think, Mater Academy or maybe one of the Mater something, one of the charter schools over there. But really, like, you have Venezuelan Americans, Hondurans, Salvadorans, a bunch of folks from Florida and other parts of the country that are literally being targeted because of the color of their skin and being picked up.
Yeah, and I think to stress that, Dilley is a private detention, right? They're getting billions of dollars of our tax dollars where they are supposed to provide education. They're supposed to provide meals, medical care, housing, a place to sleep. And they're not. So they're not even owning up to that part of the bargain. There was a study that was recently done that for the amount of money that we're paying for detentions, we could solve early childhood development in this country for every single kid. So by not participating, you're still paying taxes, right? So imagine going to Target, putting down $20 to buy that pack of gum and not walking out with the merchandise. You would never do that, right? And so your vote is an indication of your values. And when your member of Congress or your elected official does not follow your values, you vote them out. Back there with the glasses? You that look back? Yeah, yes.
Okay, hi. First off, I want to say thank you for just being here in this space, especially considering the time. I'm sure it can be a lot with the conversations that was already understood from last night. But I'm Galilea. I'm getting a master's in public administration here at AU at the concentration in race policy and administration. And a lot of the work that I'm trying to do more research in is talking about sustainable strategies when doing this work, especially with understanding racial fatigue, since a lot of our, brothers and sisters are out here on the front lines consistently doing this work, but even showing up, look in the mirror, you're like, oh man, I could be, the next person. So I'm wondering maybe what are strategies that you all have done consistently in your everyday lives, or maybe sustainable ways that we can continue on doing this work without feeling so burnt out.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to accomplish that. Yeah. No, I mean, well, first of all, I think that there's different ways to be impactful. Does anybody ever want to run for office or consider running for office? All right, yeah, folks. First, I would say that it's a very worthwhile.
Reconsidering if you're not thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very worthwhile endeavor, an important thing. That said, I think that if you look throughout history, some of the most impactful people never held a title of governor, senator, or mayor, or whatever it may be. So there are many different ways to be impactful. But these are very heavy times, very intense times for many different communities. And so you have to be able to, in terms of strategies, I think you have to be able to escape from this stuff in your own way, whatever that way is for you. I have my wife and 3 kids. My kids are 12, 10, and then 3.5.
And you're still standing.
Yeah, I know, and I'm still here. Yeah, but for me, that's I try to turn off politics at different times, and focus on my family and everything. But I would just say, as an individual, it just depends, what else you're into and what else you enjoy and all that. But it's incredibly important right now. I feel like there's a lot of burned out people right now, honestly.
But it's by design.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
I think it's really important for us to really be clear that it is by design. It is by design that your social media feeds are outrageous. It's by design because they figure that it's easier for you to get lost in that, feel defeated. Because I can tell you that what we know for a fact, that there's more of us on the right side of history than them. And all they have is to burn us out. And if you're looking for ways to rest, imagine that you basically learn how to tap in because other people will have you, and then you come out, right? So it's almost like a flock of geese. When the leader gets tired, it goes in the back, and someone else takes lead. And that is what's happening, but we need to have those active conversations. So there's no judgment. But I also recognize, if you ask me, what also is my true north? We're fortunate enough that our biggest obstacle to saving our democracy is massive mobilization to go vote. Because Ukrainians don't have that. If you ever need inspiration, the average age of our Congress, thank God for Joaquin because he lowers that age, the average age for our Congress is roughly 75 years old. In Ukraine, it's 42. They're a new democracy. They understand what it means not to have rights. And they are, and I recognize that it's a gross example, but if you ever need inspiration of what they're fighting for, is that they understand what it means to be under a regime where if you're LGBTQ, whether you're an artist, whether you're a woman, not only is there judgment, but there's repercussions with possibly your very life. And right now, sometimes people ask me, well, why aren't Latinos marching en masse? Because we're very candidly afraid. Because the disappearances are real. But that's why we also have to lean in and champion that the reason we're in this moment in America is because we're the most multicultural generation of Americans that we've ever seen. Our children represent the alpha generation, a majority minority. And if you ask me what gets me up in the morning, is that I don't want to be able to look at my daughter be raised in a country where she has less rights than I had. It's not acceptable, because we actually know better. And so give yourself walks in the woods, super important. Go do your yoga, do what you find, because when you're resting, there are people going taking lead, but then tap in so that the other person can rest.
And I'm sorry, that's a good, I know there's so many questions. Again, I'm the bad guy here, but.
Not at all.
If you want to just close it out, and then we have a student to close the day for us, and then certainly we'll get you on time.
Thank you, Emmy, for organizing this great event. Thank you, Ben, and all the folks from the Sine Institute. María Teresa, Kumar, thank you for accepting to be a Sine Fellow, because now we have the joy to have you often at the campus, and I know we're going to be doing virtual events, so you're part of the familia of AU. And Congressman Castro, thank you for coming and joining us today. I'm Ernesto Castañeda. I'm a faculty member here, and I also direct the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies, when we do research about Latinos in the U.S. and what's happening in Latin America, as well as the Immigration Lab, where we interview U.S. Latinos and their issues, youth, and all the Latinos, as well as immigrants and asylum seekers from Latin America and around the world. Please raise your hand if you are affiliated with CLAUS, the Center, or the Immigration Lab, or Sociology. Raise your hand. Hi. So these guys do a lot of work every day advancing the knowledge of what actually immigrants are going through. And we're always wrestling with policies, so it's great to have a lawmaker here, and then a leader like you, María Teresa, who's been organizing, registering people to vote, and communicating the issues that we have in MS now and many issues. So it's an inspiration for all this new generation of leaders who are going to follow on your steps and make sure that the realities that we know about what immigrants actually contribute to the U.S. and that they are not criminals, that we don't have a president saying that Somalis are fraudsters or that Latinos are the main issue facing the U.S., because we know it's not true. So thank you again for your work, and thank you, Emmy.
Thank you. Also a co-sponsor today, so we love collaborating with them. So thank you.
Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Julia Cuchillera, and I'm also a student associate with the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics. Thank you so much to María Teresa and Congressman Castro for such a wonderful and insightful discussion. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Your presence and engagement are what makes events like this meaningful. As we reflect on what we've heard, I hope we take with us not only a deeper understanding of the remarkable contributions that Latino communities have made to American democracy, but also a renewed commitment to active citizenship and inclusive participation. This panel is just one example of how the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics strives to inspire students and community members to think critically, engage respectively, and work across differences to address the complex issues of our time. Let today's conversation fuel your curiosity, strengthen your commitment to civic engagement, and remind you that our democracy grows stronger when we listen and act together. Thank you for being such an engaged and dynamic audience and community. The strength of the Sine Institute lies in the ability to convene, communicate, and collaborate, bringing together policymakers, practitioners, journalists, students, and change makers to exchange ideas and build meaningful connections across sectors and generations. As we continue this work, we invite you to stay connected with us beyond today's event. Be sure to follow the Sine Institute on social media and subscribe to our newsletter for updates on upcoming programming, fellowship opportunities, and Institute initiatives. And please mark your calendars for our next Fellows event on March 19th. We look forward to gathering with you again for another opportunity to learn, engage, and collaborate. Thank you all for being a part of the Sine Institute community, and have a wonderful rest of your days.